Welcome back to the Umucho podcast with Dydine, Umunyana, and Alex Anderson, the podcast where we explore different cultures with people from all around the world.
Today we're talking with Paul Wilder about his experiences growing up in a displaced persons camp in Austria during the Second World War, and also his experiences moving to America and a whole bunch of interactions with different people and cultures throughout his life. And he has a lot of great advice and anecdotes about how we can all become more connected.
Yeah, and how it's amazing that he comes back from that background of, Holocaust and just horrible history. But Paul has dedicated his life to make this world a little better than he found it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And guys, you all are going to learn everything about that and more in this next episode. Please enjoy. All right.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Dydine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to share your story on our podcast, Umucho Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's my pleasure.
All right. Well, Paul, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself? Who are you? Where are you from? What's your story?
All right. Well, first of all, I come from an extreme Holocaust background where I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, where literally I was told both on my mother and father's sides, we lost 99% of our entire family in the different concentration camps that they were distributed to.
Wow.
Having said that, my mother and father to be were sent to they were originally from Warsaw, where they were part of the Warsaw Ghetto, and my father escaped to be a partisan in the forests. But later on, after the war, there was nothing left in Warsaw, and so the agency tried to find where they could send refugees to whatever countries were accepting them. So it just so happened that my mother and father-to-be, because I was not born yet, were sent to a small rural area outside the outskirts of Salzburg, Austria. And they lived there with other refugees in what's called a displaced persons camp. So I was born in the displaced persons camp. And it was certainly nothing much to talk about, and it was quite amazing that A, I was born, B, that I survived, because back then, the facilities they had, it wasn't really a hospital, it was a broken down displacement center. So they often tell me how even surviving, I was born premature, and so I had to be put into an incubator for well over 10 weeks, and they don't even know where they got the incubator other than maybe from Salzburg that was loaned to the displacement camp facilities. Anyway, finally, my parents and I made it by ship across the United States, and we entered into Ellis Island approximately 1952. And shortly thereafter, after my father was given some work they found for him in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg. My sister, who was the only sibling I had that survived, everybody else was eliminated in the camps, she found her way to California and told my parents that, hey, come on here, we don't need a jacket from Pennsylvania. So my parents and I then eventually moved to Los Angeles, where we moved to a very, very culturally diverse area, I wouldn't call it a ghetto, but clearly it was a very impoverished area of Los Angeles. And they were happy just to be alive, after the war. And I had so much love from my parents and my sister that I didn't know where I lived was impoverished, nor do I remember ever needing anything, because literally the love dripped off of our walls, and whatever limited toys were given me, I just thought life couldn't be better. But I saw a lot of things very early in life that I think most children may not see. And not only the cultural diversity of where we lived, but how we lived. And as my parents got different work, and as we started to go from neighborhood to better neighborhood, each neighborhood had its own set of new, cultural experiences. And with each successive move improving their life, we got to move to different and varied neighborhoods and cultural background. I think the one thing that was not only a blessing and a curse to me was the fact that at a very, 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 very young age, maybe even 5 years old, for some reason, the survivors from the Holocaust seemed to frequent my parents' very small apartment. And I listened to stories from a lot of different people, so all survivors, from maybe the ages of 5 to 8, 9, I can't really be sure, but I would listen to their stories of who died, where, how, things of that nature.
Right.
And I think that was not really what a child should be hearing.
No.
But as I grew, it really was a blessing because it allowed me to not only learn firsthand the experience of different cultures amongst where we lived, but I really learned from these survivor stories really important lessons such as respect, tolerance, and just being a good human being to everybody. I grew up with little to no prejudice because, as I said, as I moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, I lived amongst so many different ethnicities that I didn't really have that ever, that prejudice side of me, nor was it ever spoken about in my home. So it was a very, very unique upbringing and one that I treasure. The curse was that since then, I have been involved in human struggle that was forged from the Holocaust stories, if you will. And it has been a curse because it has never been really away from me. And my very close relationship to understanding that the downtrodden, whoever they may be, has always been my priority. And so I've always been for the underdog, so to speak, and I've always, from a very young age, as a matter of fact, I was when I was 15 years old, I was the very first and youngest member of an organization called the JDL, which is the Jewish Defense League, back in the days of Irv Rubin. And it was started by a rabbi called Meir Kahane, who wrote a book, Never Again. It has been a curse because that necessity that I feel in the core of my being has never allowed me not to care. And that's a good thing, but it's also a curse.
Yeah, the burden
so
can be.
Therein lies, my battle with problems within our society and our social fabric. And I have forever since been involved in radical movements and actually volunteering for a multiplicity of people's projects. So that's why I call it a curse. And even today, now that I've reached the, old age of 200 years old, I'm still involved. I'm still involved in all these types of things. And I don't know, as I said, it's been a curse. It's been good because it keeps me understanding the necessity to find similarity rather than division of people. And even if there are reasons that a person would, so to speak, be prejudiced, at least we have to find a way by which to communicate, to understand each other's stories,
Yeah.
so that we can understand where they came from, why they think the way they do. I may not still want to invite somebody over to my home for dinner, but at least it'll give me a better understanding of their story,
Right.
and hopefully them a better understanding of my story.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because, as they say, no man is an island. And it
Yeah.
is clearly necessary now more than ever. You know, I used to do a lot of work with genocide-related issues from all different people, whether they be from the 5 African countries, you know, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, on and on and on to Darfur, but also the Yazidi problem, the Rohingya problem, the Cambodian genocide, the Syrian genocide. And it just seems to go on and on and on, where luckily it allowed me to meet Dydine, who I asked, being a child survivor of Rwanda, to be part of this symposium that I put together, which really, quite frankly, was amazing. It was, it included not only top elected officials, such as congressmen, council people, you know, local governor, mayors, but it also included probably 24 of the highest ranking religious figures of
I
all
remember that.
religions. And it was an amazing event, one that literally blew everybody's mind, because they couldn't understand how so much diversity was on one stage together, arm in arm, you know, calling upon, you know, the sanity of the world.
Yeah.
You know, that's about that. You know, as you know, I'm extremely grounded spiritually, and even though I have studied many religions through my work and even my master's degree in religious philosophy, I've tried to understand belief systems of many. And the truth is that as long as that religion teaches an individual how to best be the best person they can be, I guess it's a good religion. I know after studying all these religions why I have chosen to continue to believe and have my faith within the Jewish religion for a multiplicity of reasons.
Yeah.
But the belief system I have now, because I'm now very much obsessed, if you will, not so much just by different people's genocide, but the mere fact that I really truly fear of civilization, global civilization. And even though I've lived a very rich life,
Yeah.
you know, I have 4 children and 4 grandchildren, and I really am concerned about what we now are leaving our children and future children, what kind of a legacy we are leaving. And so my concern now is really for civilization. And now, more than ever, the need for inclusion rather than division is ultimately necessary. You know, I've studied many theories that have come from both ancient and mystical Jewish tradition, and one of them is called Musar, and it's brilliant, quite frankly. And what it basically says is that once a person has their thing together, they're healthy, they're organized, you know, this and that, all the different attributes that a person has. Once they have their life somewhat together, it is then completely necessary for them to go beyond themselves to help others. And I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I only pray that, whatever has divided us will dwindle. Unfortunately, I find the greatest of um, negatives being number one, greed,
Yeah.
number two, ego,
Yeah.
and not truly having an understanding of how this world was for everybody, not just for the some. And when that is realized, clearly we can bring ourselves back to somewhat of a unity where our children will have a better life together, different children. And and I believe that to be true. And I believe it to be true for one main reason. If we can reach the majority of people, then we can be successful, because I truly believe that the majority of the globe are still decent people.
So it sounds like you are like an innately curious person, and when it comes like going back to talking or learning about different people and kind of being exposed to all these different cultures from an early age, a lot of people don't have that curiosity like you seem to have. How would you get people who aren't as innately curious to be or to reach out to other people to understand more?
Well, I first of all, Alex, I don't think it's about curiosity. I think it's about the basic nature of an individual. And if they have not grown up with taught hatred or prejudice, then I think they're more open to be amongst others, if you will. And I don't think it's a curiosity. I think it's a core feeling of existence which runs in the thread of man. Um, to answer your second part of the question of how that might come to be,
Yeah.
I believe that only through active, and I mean active, not just talk, but active ways by which for people to come together, to be able to communicate about whatever um, questions they have, to try to understand where that other cultural person has experienced. We've all had some type of sadness. And I know this to be true because when doing the Genocide Coalition Symposium, I met and became very close, not only to other genocidal victims, but clearly cultural different people. And we all had the same, not only ability, but need, if you will, to make this place a better place. And I think the only
Yeah.
thing that's going to cause that to happen is to be open to hear, understand, and know more about somebody else, them in return knowing more about you. And I think we'll put away a lot of the hearsay and um, ridiculous rumors of past um, generational prejudice.
Prejudice, yeah.
I want to tell you a very, very quick story just to tell you how this ignorance perpetuates. So my mother, who became very old and ill, we finally couldn't take care of her myself. So we had hired a wonderful Catholic caretaker, and my mother was so kind to her. And I think she worked for my mother for about 2 years. And my mother was always very kind to her, and I know that because after my mother died, the caretaker came to me and said, I have not been treated by other people as your mother has treated me. And by her being Jewish and me being Catholic, it really it really said something to me because it was never about a religion. It
Yeah.
was about the nature of an individual and their desire to help. Anyway, what the interesting story was that she said, your mother was just so kind to me would you mind if I came to her funeral? And I said, of course, it would be our honor. And she hesitated, and I said, what's wrong? She goes, well, and I said, what's the problem? She goes, well, to be honest with you, I don't know if I'll be able to sit through the funeral. And I said, why is that? She finally told me something that blew me away. And I looked at her, is this real? This Catholic woman told me that she would not feel comfortable at the funeral because she had never seen a person buried while sitting in a chair. And I said, what are you talking about? She goes, well, it's been rumored in my family that that's what they do to Jews. You know, when they bury them sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
And I said, that's completely wrong, completely ridiculous. And if she wanted to come to the funeral, she could even come with me in my car.
Yeah.
And say her goodbyes to my mother. She brought flowers, laid it on the grave. She saw that she was not buried sitting in a chair and was just so thankful to me. And to this day, I scratch my head wondering, how could this person
believe such
even
a thing?
If they weren't smart intellectually, how could they believe such a story?
Yeah.
And so I told that story mainly to tell you that so many people have been ingrained with rumor, prejudice, and lies.
Yeah.
And so we won't get to the bottom of it until this woman opened up to me about what her issue was, and me telling her that's completely not true.
Yeah.
And by me finding out more about her and her finding out about me. So I think if people, in the broader sense, will be open to communication, because communication is everything.
I know. Yeah.
You will find out more.
Yeah.
It will give rise to more questions. It will get rid of ugly prejudice.
Yeah, it will help
rumors.
us. Yeah, it will help us see more of how we are alike than, what we're perceived to be. Like what she thought that the funeral will look like, and then she went there and it looked different. So she was a witness.
But it's exactly that ignorance that perpetuated this ridiculous thought in her mind.
Wow.
So, as I said, communications and being in a situation where you are allowed to at least understand others and let them understand you, because we're all the way we are by the way we were brought up.
Right.
And I think that, Alex, is really the key, not only through knowledge-based programs, but through actual speaking to each other. And when you have the diversity speaking to each other, I think we all know more about each other to be able to at least respect and allow the idea that we are all meant to be happy and experience the best life we can.
Right.
And as I said, diversity is beautiful too.
Yeah.
It really is, because how boring it would be if we only had one kind of situation.
That's what we think too. That's what we thought. It would be super boring. One language, one color, and one country. Oh man.
If you believe in something called God, whatever that might mean to you, he did create every single individual in his likeness. But God, in whatever teachings, never describes what that likeness is. It's only about attributes.
Right.
It's about nature. It's not about color. It's not about different cultures. It's not about anything other than the attributes which lies within deep within each individual.
Mm.
Oh, Paul, you briefly mentioned something that kind of struck me, the Genocide Coalition. Could you speak a little bit more on that?
I can. It is a fact that, except for the American Indian,
Mm.
in modern times, no other culture other than the Jewish people have suffered a greater loss in numbers of people. We suffered the execution of 6 million people during the Nazi Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
of which 1.5 million was just children.
Wow.
Now, just because we lost more in numbers, it doesn't take away from the Armenians that lost 1.5 million, or the Cambodians that lost 800,000, or each individual African country that has lost however millions, or
Yeah.
so it's not a matter of how many were lost. So the idea for the Genocide Symposium that I put together was to put together not just Jews, but everybody who has in fact suffered genocide, and to come together to, number one, ask the current globe to help stop other current genocides
Right.
that are happening today.
Oh yeah.
I mean, look what's happened in Syria.
Oh
Look
yeah.
what's happened in the Yazidis or the Rohingyas, and what's still happening in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that I had was to put all that I could put together that suffered genocide, and we came together where I organized the Genocide Coalition Symposium. And there was everybody who, not everybody, but most genocide or genocidal victims were part of this symposium, including the Cambodians, including the, everybody that I've mentioned before.
Yeah.
And we all stood together because genocide is not just a Jewish thing, it's a multiplicity of people's loss.
Yeah. Right.
And so, again, to come together, to fight together, to try to help end ongoing current genocides.
Yeah. That was amazing. Alex, I was part of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was part of the Genocide Coalition. It was amazing. There was a lot of survivors from different countries all over the world, and each person shared their stories. But it was just like we all went through the same thing: divisionism, hatred, name callings. And it was just like it was an amazing experience.
One of the things that was great about our speaker, we had not only an archbishop, but we also had a reverend from the Armenian church. And when he spoke, he really hit it on the head. And what he said was, it doesn't matter which people lost in the genocide. The victims are different, but the genocide is the same.
Yeah. The same
So
idea,
matter,
the same ideology.
It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Jewish genocide or the Armenian genocide or the Cambodian genocide. Only the victims and perpetrators were different. The same outcome has been shared by all of those, different people.
Paul, in the beginning of our interview, you mentioned that your sister survived Holocaust. How many other children your parents had?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know, because sometimes people just never talked about it. In fact, I didn't even realize it until I was about 14 or 15. Is when they really, really, really started getting on a personal, level with me. I know for a fact that I had other siblings, um, and that came to be because once I found a picture of a beautiful girl, and I asked who this was, and they were all very reluctant in telling me that was one of your sisters. Her name was Marissa,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I said, well, how many others? And like I said, they never really talked about it. I can't, which is unfortunate, I can't be clear really how many siblings
You had.
I may have lost. I only grew up with the one that did survive.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that there was literally hundreds upon hundreds of, I never grew up with cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, grandparents, second cousins, whatever you can drum up.
Yeah.
I never grew up with
Any of that?
family, so it was
Yeah.
very hard for me to understand when people were talking about relationships in their family. I had nobody to base what they were, saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure. Now that everybody's gone before me, I won't know.
Yeah.
I know I have a picture of the one, and because of their reluctance, I know there had to be others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot that I don't know. And as I said, I continue to be plagued
Yeah.
by this. And it's very difficult for a child of Holocaust survivors,
I understand.
because in my case, even though they say I've lost literally hundreds upon hundreds of family members, the only maybe good thing about it was I didn't realize who I lost, or I didn't know them, so I couldn't have become more attached to an individual. It's just numbers to me,
Yeah.
but I know it caused me a lot of grief, agony,
Yeah.
growing up all my life, because all my friends, had their families. They had cousins and second cousins and nieces and nephews and uncles, and
Yeah.
I never had that. And it really, it always has bothered me, because you don't know
Yeah.
your history,
Yeah.
and you don't know the family
Yeah.
of your history. The only ones that I knew was a mother, father, and a sister.
Yeah. Was there moments, okay, as your parents were Holocaust survivors, they endured everything, they experienced it firsthand, and then they came here, and then they're going to, continue life, here in America, and then they have you, newborn, I would say, because you were just 3. Were they like very protective of you, like for you to not know what happened, or they're also still going through a lot of trauma that they didn't even know how to deal with what had just happened? What was the case with your parents and your sister as well?
And they weren't able to share it for several reasons. Number one, how do you share this gruesome reality with a child? You can't go into depth, um, and be able to explain this to a child only when they become mature, let's say 15 or 16, because it's just too harsh of a reality. The other thing is that many of them tried to put it out of their mind and just make a better life. So it was very, very difficult for many survivors to tell their stories, and certainly share them, with their children. You asked a question before about was I protected, and or overprotected, or to a certain extent, but I never felt that. But what was amazing was that I told you the people that frequented my parents' apartment. Um, Two things were interesting. number one, if a gentleman came to my house or to our apartment, all of a sudden my father would say, "You see this guy? From now on, he's your uncle."
Mm.
So
Oh,
all of a sudden, I got a new uncle. I had no clue who he was, from where or what, and it was interesting. The other thing that was really, really amazing was many of the survivors that visited my parents' apartment had lost their children in the concentration camps.
Oh, yeah.
And so when they came to America, oh my goodness, I had like, 12 or 15 parents. I was the only child amongst this entire group that lost their children. And so I was very, very protected
Yeah.
and almost couldn't do, anything wrong. Of course, as I grew up, I made up for that. But what I'm saying is there was so many like parents that were attached to me because I was one of the very few children
That was
to
born in
have
refugee
survived
camps.
that ordeal.
Mm.
So it's kind of interesting, what happened.
Yeah, it is. It's the solidarity that comes after these tragedies. In Rwanda,
Yeah.
it's the same. We have a lot of orphans, but survivors come together, and some orphans become parents for the younger orphans, just for us to support each other.
Right.
And
It's,
then
it's very similar.
yeah,
It's
and you
very,
end up calling each other sisters, brothers, and cousins, and you just,
yeah.
you name it. So we can,
And those orphans that have no clue who their family was leaves them with a very, very blank question inside their hearts. Where did I come from? What's my history? Who's who? On and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But God is good, and He gives us what we can to carry forward. And all I can say is, no matter what happens to you in life, one thing my sister used to tell me, and that is, no matter what happens, just shut up and keep swimming. And that's true, because you know what? Life must go on.
Yeah.
And you still have to make your mark.
Yes.
And once you have your thing together, it is your responsibility to go beyond yourself for the other.
What mark do you want to leave on the world? Experiencing everything you have, what do you wish to do for the world and for the people that you can help?
For me personally, I just don't want to squander my life. And as long as I have energy and the ability, and with some of the talents that I think I have, I think it's not just my dream, but I think it's many people's dreams to make it a better place, to teach your children well, to teach your children right. Because again, life is so beautiful. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, including myself, to truly, truly make a difference. Then at the end of your life, you'll have fewer regrets, and you did your part.
I know.
I'm not done, and we all should not be done.
No.
Until we bring forth a better place.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul.
It's my pleasure. I wish you nothing but the best, health, and happiness.
Thanks for listening to this episode, folks. I hope you learned as much as we did. Paul really is he's a sweet guy, and as much as he's been through, he is very strong for sharing that. And
he never rests. Like, he brings people together from all over the world to just I don't know, he's amazing.
And guys, if you ever want to support our podcast, you can just go ahead and visit our social media accounts. We're on all social media platforms. Just follow us on there, and you can become our patrons on Patreon if you like. But until then, tune in to our next episode.
Stay tuned.